notice ideas, right? These are everything that connects to each other are connected through ideas. When you can see these crossovers, then it really doesn't matter what you're reading or what you're being exposed to. Either it's new or you've seen it before. If it's new, then you can learn it quickly with what you can see, identify as similarities, right? And if you learned it already, or if you know, then you can see, well, are these different angles to the same idea? Is it being explained better this way, right? Like, does it help me understand it? Or certainly, like, is the author wrong, right? You want to get to the point where you can even critique the author and say, hey, I disagree with what the author has to say because of this, this, and that, right? That's what critical reading is about. And this is why, like, it really does take time to build up kind of a repertoire of ideas. Right? It's an idea of reading between the lines, to be able to infer and make implicit connections. Okay, so for this week, we are reading 4,000 Weeks. Right? Any thoughts, comments before we go in? Spilled coffee. No, okay. Let's talk about this quote here. What does this quote mean? What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. Someone give me an interpretation. What does it mean? Or what is the person trying to say? What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. What is it here? What does the it mean here? Anyone? Belief. What makes beliefs unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured? Is your mistaken belief that what can be cured? Not quite beliefs. What are things that usually are cured? What are things that are curable in the first place? That requires curing? Disease. Illness. Good. Right? These are things that we got from inferring this word cured. Right? And so what makes, say, disease unbearable is your mistaken belief that this disease or illness can be cured. So now it's starting to be a bit more clear, but not quite there yet, right? It says, what makes any disease unbearable? What does unbearable mean? What does unbearable mean? Howard, what do you think? What's unbearable? If something is unbearable, it means it is what? Hmm? CV, what do you think? Can't deny. Can't endure or handle. Unbearable. Right? What makes any disease hard to endure or unendurable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. What makes any disease harder to endure is if you think you can actually cure it, is what this quote is saying. What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. Why is that? Let's think about the contrapositive. Like, what makes it bearable is your belief that it cannot be cured. This is another way of figuring out what things mean, is you flip it upside down or invert the equation. Right? What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. What makes it bearable is your belief that it cannot be cured. Does that make sense? So, what is this quote trying to suggest here? That are things easier, better, or harder? More enjoyable, harder to enjoy? If it is curable? Anybody? Please. What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. What does the word mistaken suggest here about the it being curable? To say that it's a mistaken belief that it can be cured implies what? It implies what about the it here? Yes, exactly. It actually cannot be cured. So now it's starting to look a bit more clear, right? That what cannot be cured but you think, believe you can cure leads to what? Leads to what? What does it mean to be unbearable? Let's just think about what's going on here, right? Like, if this is a thing that you actually cannot cure, but think you can cure, what are you going to spend most of your time doing? Trying to cure something that you cannot cure, which then creates what? Waste of time. What else? Not only are you wasting time, are you happy in the process? Okay. Basically more suffering, right? But the situation here is predicated on your beliefs, right? It's the fact that you believe you can cure it that prompts you to take action to curing it. Right? So fundamentally, what's going on here isn't necessarily the disease itself, it's actually your interpretation or belief of the disease that determines how you behave. Right? And how your life is going to play out oftentimes is based on what you believe in, right? Because that determines your behavior, behavior determines your habits. And habits make your actions, and that leads to the results of your life. Okay. All right, Ian, can you start us off? Yeah. So one of the nice things with reading modern books is that the author usually would just tell you what the book is about, right? It's a lot more straightforward and direct. Just like right here in the very beginning, first thing he says, the real problem is that we unwittingly inherited and feel pressure to live by a troublesome set of ideas. So beliefs, right? Wrong beliefs in particular about how to live life, spend time. That's the thesis of the book, right? Oftentimes people are like, okay, so I got the idea, like, can I put the book down? Yeah, you can, but you're going to miss on a lot of the subtle details that support the argument, right? And oftentimes, just memorizing certain thesis or points doesn't help with their own understanding of the world, right? It takes reading these actual examples for yourself to evaluate whether or not it makes sense, right? Kaden, can you read the next part for us?
On balance, you can definitely be grateful you weren't born a peasant in early medieval England. For one thing, you have been much less likely to make it to adulthood. But even if you had, the life that stretched ahead of you would have been one defined as servitude. You have spent your back-breaking days farming the land on which the local Lord permitted you to live. In exchange for you giving him a crippling proportion of what you produced or the income you could generate from it. The church would have demanded regular contributions as well, and you have been much too scared of internal damnation to disobey. At night, you would have returned to your one-room hut, alongside not only the rest of your family, who, like you, would rarely have bathed or brushed your teeth, but also your pigs and chickens, which you brought indoors at night. Bears and wolves still roamed the forests and would help themselves to any animals left outside after sunset. Disease would have been another constant companion. Familiar sickness ranged from measles to influenza to bubonic plague, and St. Anthony's fire, a form of food poisoning caused by moldy grain, which left the delirious, suffering feeling as though his skin were burning, or as he were being bitten by unseen teeth.
Okay, good. Where have we seen this kind of example? What's the other reading that uses, the past? Where are we seeing an author talking about how the past is worse? Peggy? Hello? Think. It's literally the first page of Utopia for Realists. Right? Do you guys still remember what that book is? Right, on page 1, it says, for roughly 99% of the world, 99% of human history was poor, hungry, dirty, afraid, stupid, sick, and ugly. Literally, that's the first sentence, right? Again, he is arguing for utopia, right? A better future. Society needs to be shaped a certain way. He's arguing for a certain kind of utopia, not necessarily a societal kind, but a personal kind, right? Life can be better, is what they're both talking about. But from one book, they're both talking about this idea of life can be better. But for 4,000 weeks, it's personally. And for Utopia for Realists, it's for society. Right? Things diverge, but it's all based off the same idea. The time before timetables. Joshua, can you read the next part for us?
Eventual set of problems you almost certainly wouldn't have experienced. Problems of time. Even on your most exhausting days, it probably wouldn't have occurred to you that you had too much to do, that you needed to hurry, or that life was moving too fast. Let alone that you'd gotten your work-life balance wrong. By the same token,
Uh-huh. If that sounds confusing, it's because our modern way of thinking about time is so deeply entrenched that we forget it even is a way of thinking. We're like the proverbial fish who have no idea what water is because it surrounds them completely. It's another piece of reading that we've done before. Well, actually, no, done in the previous critical reading. This is water, right? The immediate analogy is that we are like fish in the water, right? For a fish being in water doesn't really recognize what water is because it's just around it. In the same way for us humans, time is that same kind of thing. We're just in time. So it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around what it's like to actually step outside of time, right? Be in a space where there is no time. So get a little mental distance on it, though, and our perspective starts to look rather peculiar. We imagine time to be something separate from us and from the world around us, an independent world of mathematically measurable sequences, in the words of American cultural critic Lewis Mumford. To see what he means, consider some time-related questions. How do you plan to spend tomorrow afternoon? Say, or what you've accomplished over the last year. And without being fully conscious of it at first, you'll probably find yourself visualizing a calendar, a yardstick, a tape measure, the numbers on a clock face, or some hazier kind of abstract timeline. You'll then proceed to measure and judge your real life against this imaginary gauge, lining up your activities against the timeline in your head. Edward Hall was making the same point with this image of time as a conveyor belt that's constantly passing us by. So it really is something to think about, right? Like how we think about time. Whereas in the past, time was just happening and you just did your thing and then you died, right? It just never was like the way we think about time. We have, like, a lot of what we say around time is, how do you use your time efficiently, right? This idea of how do I use my time most efficiently? Or how do I maximize right? We have so many gurus on time management or time management systems. All apps nowadays are about improving what? Most of the apps nowadays are designed to do what for you? Make your life easier. In what way is it easier? Saves time. By easier, they mean saving time. Right? Does it necessarily mean it is easier or like more enjoyable? No, it just is easier, smoother, less time consuming. Right? So we can see where the values of our society are. Because they tend to think that time consumption, or if you can do something in half an hour that you take an hour to do, is usually considered bad. Right? Or for example, if you are going to school, but you get to skip a grade, you get to accelerate the process or graduate early, it's considered good, right? You're perceived as super smart. Right? Okay. Peggy, can you read the next part for us? The medieval farmer. Could you be a bit louder? Lunatic.
There was no conscious pressure to get everything done, either because the farmer's work is care so always the other working under harvest forever, so there is no sense in racing for some practical moment of completion.
Okay, good. There's several interesting points that came out to me here, right? There was no need to think of time as something abstract and separate from life. You milked the cows when they needed milking and harvested the crops when it was harvest time. And anybody who tried to impose an external schedule on any of that, for example, by doing a month's milking in a single day, or to get it out of the way, or by trying to make the harvest come sooner, would rightly have been considered a lunatic. There's a kind of external versus internal schedule. This idea that it's a bit foreign for us to think of, right? But what's the difference? What's the external kind of externally imposed versus internal schedule? Jason, what do you think is the difference? What's the conflict or tension here being shown? When he says, there was no need to think of time as something abstract and separate. You did what you needed to do, and anybody who tried to impose an external schedule on any of that, say, doing things the way they want, would rightly have been considered a lunatic. So, what's an external schedule and what's an internal schedule? Ah, good. That's a really great separation. Which one is should and which one is want? External is... Is it should or is it want? The external timeline here is, for example, wanting to do a month's milking. Okay, so it's the other way. Good. There's a want here versus a should here. Right? What you want is not always what you should be doing. There's a kind of human involvement here, right? It's like an ego or desire for things to be a certain way. For it to be a way that is not in accordance with nature. Lisa, I think you need to change the mouse because it's... Lisa, you need to change the mouse. It's really loud. Right? Because what you should be doing is to milk the cow when it needs to be milked. Right? Harvest the crops when it needs to be harvested. That's just going with the flow, literally. Right? Whereas everything else is what you want. But what you want is usually not necessarily in alignment with how things should be. What's happened for us is that we've really disconnected with this kind of internal time, right? There are times when you need to rest, there are times when you need to work. But for us, it's just work, right? Because we divide our days by 24 hours. These are the hours I need to do this. Which is why it's really hard to ever feel like you're in alignment with something. Right? Does that make sense? It's very subtle. There was no anxious pressure to get everything done either. Because the farmer's work is infinite. There will always be another milking and always another harvest, forever. So there's no sense in racing towards some hypothetical moment of completion. So it's also really worth thinking for us, right? Is our work infinite too? If it isn't, if there is a finish line, is it a finish line that's worth rushing towards, worth finishing sooner? Right? Or if we step back far enough, is it, for example, high school, there is a finish line. You finish high school, but then there's college, right? Which is another 4 years. And then after college, just work. If you step back far enough, it starts to feel like an infinite game as well. Right? So you want to think, right? Are we being kind of lunatic, right? If we are going things by the externally imposed timeline, right? We want things to be a certain way, so we rush it, right? By doing a month's milking in a single day, just to get it out of the way. So we have more time to do something else. I feel like we tend to do this a lot for ourselves. That we would binge watch Netflix so we can get it out of the way. Historians call this way of living task orientation because the rhythms of life emerge organically from the tasks themselves. Rather than being lined up against an abstract timeline, the approach that has become second nature for us today. It's tempting to think of medieval life as moving slowly, but it's more accurate to say that the concept of life moving slowly would have struck most people as meaningless. Slowly as compared to what? Right? There is no slow, it's just the way things need to be. You can't make crops grow faster, you can't make the cows produce more milk back then, right? Except we can now with chemicals and hormones, right? In those days, before clocks, when you did need to explain how long something might take, your only option was to compare with some other concrete activity. So there's a comparison between the concrete versus the abstract. Abstract. There we go. Medieval people might speak of a task lasting a misery while, the approximate time to recite the Psalm 50, known as misery, from the Bible, or alternatively a pissing while, which should require no explanation. Living this way, one can imagine an experience would have felt expansive and fluid, suffused with something it might not be an exaggeration to call a kind of magic. Notwithstanding the many real privations of his existence, our peasant farmer might have sensed a luminous, awe-inspired dimension to the world around him. Untroubled by any notion of time ticking away, he might have experienced the heightened sense of the vividness of things, the feeling of timelessness that Richard Rohr, a contemporary Franciscan priest and author, calls living deep in time, right? For us, we seem to all be haunted by this idea of time ticking away, of not doing things that we actually want to do, and then we're just running out of time. right? Or we're always being chased by deadlines. And it's interesting that this word in itself, right? Deadlines. Why are they called deadlines? Like, what's the whole concept behind deadlines? How do deadlines work?
Giving you pressure.
Giving you pressure, how?
Asking you to finish the work before the date.
Before the date. So do X by Y, right? And then? Or else Z. Right? That's literally how deadlines work. Do this by then, or else. Or else what? There has to be some kind of external negative consequence to impose a certain kind of deadline, right? Or else you're dead, right? It's the idea that we have to force ourselves to do things against the flow of time. Okay. Joshua, can you read the next part for us? Sorry, no, Jason. Actually. At dusk, the medieval country dweller might have top of the right page, sensed.
Spirits whispering in the forest, along with the bears and wolves. Chloe the bear. He might have felt himself one tiny part of the vast fleet of histories, in which these distant ancestors were almost as alive to him as his own children. We can assert all this with some confidence because we still occasionally encounter islands of deep time today. In those moments when, to quote the writer Gary
Eberly.
Everly, we step into a realm where there is enough of everything, where we are not trying to fill a void in ourselves for the world. The boundary separating the self from the rest of reality grows blurry, and time stands still. The clock does not stop, for of course, Augerly writes, but we do not hear it ticking.
Okay, good. We all have experienced this kind of moment, right? This period of space and time where it just seems like you're literally in the moment, right? Whether it's hanging out with your friends, whether it's being captivated by a movie, it's the idea of like, wait, I didn't realize this much time just went by, right? So when you go on a vacation, well, actually, it depends. Like, if you go on a vacation, but your vacation is about hitting all of these spots, then it's a different kind of experience than you go there and there's no plan, right? There's nothing to get to, nothing that you have to do. There's a certain kind of sweetness that is very rare nowadays, right? Because everything is so accessible. It's also the idea, like, if you guys ever ran out of like battery on your phone and you're like, okay, now I just, enjoy the present. I don't know if you guys have even experienced that. Or like when you don't have your phones. At first it's like tough, and then with your friends, you're hanging out, you get into a flow state. Is that even something you've experienced? Flow states, anyone? Where time just feels like it stands still or doesn't move. The idea is that in those flow states, you can experience what feels like enough, right? What feels like abundance. Whereas oftentimes when we're so caught up in abstract scheduling, we never have enough time for the present moment, for just experiencing things as it is, right? Okay, so the end of eternity. Maxine, can you read the next part for us?
There's one huge drawback in giving so little thought to the abstract idea of time, though, which is that it severely limits what we can accomplish. You can be a small-scale farmer relying on this limitless schedule, but you can't be much other than a small-scale farmer or a baby. As soon as you want to coordinate the actions of more than a handful of people, you need a reliable, agreed-upon method of measuring time. This is not only held to be how the first mechanical clocks came to be invented by medieval monks, who had to begin their morning prayers not rusted dark, and yet some way of ensuring that the clock chemistry woke up at the required moment.
Okay, good. So, time, right, is necessary for coordination. Otherwise, how would all of us know to meet up here and leave at 5 p.m., right? But in return, we have to give up what? With the invention of time, we give up the present. If you think about it, why do we even need to invent time? It's so we can actually meet each other in a future point, right? So we can secure something for the future. That's how we know, like, okay, let's meet at this time every Saturday for the next 8-9 weeks. It's a future agreement. But what's going on here is, say, Saturday 2 p.m., we're here, but now your mind's thinking about 5 p.m. when I can leave. What you've given up is the present, right? Does that make sense? But it doesn't mean time is bad, it's just that it's the inevitable consequence, right? So it's about being mindful of these things that we trade for. And knowing when to use time, when not to use time is actually a lot more important than just saying, oh, this is bad, we should avoid it. Right? It'd be ridiculous if we have a anti-time movement, right? But yeah, let's skip to the bottom of that page. You don't need to believe, as Mumford sometimes seems to imply, that the invention of the clock is solely to blame for all our time-related troubles today. And I certainly won't be arguing for a return to the lifestyle of medieval peasants. But a threshold had been crossed. Before, time was just a medium in which life unfolded, the stuff that life was made of. Afterward, once time and life had been separated in most people's minds, time became a thing that you used. And it's this shift that serves as the precondition for all the uniquely modern ways in which we struggle with time today. Once time is a resource to be used, you start to feel pressure, whether from external forces or from yourself, to use it well, and to berate yourself when you feel you've wasted it. Right? That's that very first quote that we looked at. Howard, can you read it for us again? On the first page.
What makes is unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured.
Right? It's that idea of belief. I wrote here, time itself hasn't changed. It's your idea of time that has changed, right? Once we started to see time as a thing that can be used, the next question is, how to use it, right? It's just human nature. We're just going to ask, like, how to use it. And once you're using it, then we start to compare, right? I can use my time this efficiently, right? It becomes a competition. We get into a game, right? Human beings love engaging in these kind of behaviors with anything that is measured that you can compete for, right? It's all about using it efficiently, being better at it, right? But notice how time has not changed. What changed is how we view time. What changed is the belief, right? And this applies to pretty much everything that we do in life. It's how we view them that determines how we behave, how we act. What is that idea that how we view the world matters? Do you guys remember in Heretics, G.K. Chesterton talking about this in this piece? What does he say about beliefs and views of the world? If you look at the right side of I think the second page, but there are some people, nevertheless, and I am one of them, who think that the most practical and important thing about a man is still his view of the universe. We think that for a landlady to consider a lodger, it is important to know his income, but still more important to know his philosophy. We think that for a general about to fight an enemy, it is important to know the enemy's numbers, but still more important to know the enemy's philosophy. We think the question is not whether the theory of the cosmos affects matter, but whether in the long run anything else affects them. Right? G.K. Chesterton, the whole piece really is about the importance of belief and the importance of philosophy. The importance of going with true beliefs, because that will determine how you behave, right? He says, nothing in this universe is so unwise as that kind of worship of worldly wisdom. A man who is perpetually thinking of whether this race or that race is strong, of whether this cause or that cause is promising. In other words, how do I use time most efficiently, right? is the man who will never believe in anything long enough to make it succeed. So the whole point of this piece, right, again, is about why do we need philosophy? Why is philosophy important? Because it helps us think about life. It helps us stay conscious, knowing the steps to see better towards the future, and think about purpose or function, right? And now that if we use this perspective to look at 4,000 weeks, we're just focusing philosophy with time, right? That's what we're doing here, is we're trying to understand time from a philosophical perspective. Why? Because it helps us manage and understand how we're using our time and why we're using our time. Right? And like the author said here, one's time is a resource to be used. You start to feel pressured, whether from external forces or from yourself, to use it well, and to berate yourself when you feel you've wasted it, right? Every hour that passes, we ask ourselves, well, that was a waste, right? Did I use it well, right? We always tend to judge the use of our time, right, with a certain kind of value compared to like something else that I would rather do, right? Like, I would rather not be here listening to this guy talk for 3 hours. I would rather sleep. I would rather play video games. I would rather blah, 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 watch Netflix. We tend to have these comparisons, right? When you're faced with too many demands, it's easy to assume that the only answer must be to make better use of time by becoming more efficient, driving yourself harder or working for longer, as if you were a machine in the Industrial Revolution, instead of asking whether the demands themselves might be unreasonable. This is philosophy. It grows alluring to try to multitask, that is, to use the same portion of time for two things at once, as the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the first to notice. One thinks with the watch in one's hand. He complained in an 1887 essay, even as one eats one's midday meal while reading the latest news of the stock market, and it becomes a lot more intuitive to project your thoughts about your life into an imagined future, leaving you anxiously wondering if things will unfold as you want them to. Right? We do this to ourselves all the time. And he noticed it in 1887. Well, for us, right, when we eat, we're looking at our phones. And not only are we looking at our phones, on our phones, there's YouTube, playing music, and then we're also reading something, and then we're also swiping around on Instagram, right? So we're actually doing even more things now with our multitasking. But the interesting thing here that I want us to kind of think about more is, instead of asking whether the demands themselves might be unreasonable, and this idea of efficiency, right? We've seen this idea of efficiency before in G.K. Chesterton again. In the left side, where he says, when everything about a people is for the time growing weak and ineffective, it begins to talk about efficiencies. So it is that when a man's body is wrecked, he begins for the first time to talk about health. Right? We can substitute that with time. Right? So it is that when a man's time is a wreck, he begins for the first time to talk about time management. Same idea. Vigorous organisms talk not about their process, but about their aims. There cannot be any better proof of the physical efficiency of a man than he talks cheerfully of a journey to the end of the world. Right? People don't talk about time if you're in the moment. right? It's only when you're not in the moment, worrying about the future or worrying about the past, that you talk about time, right? Even if the ideal of such a men were simply the ideal of kicking a man downstairs, they thought of the end like men, not of the process like paralytics. They did not say, efficiently elevating my right leg, using, you will notice, the muscles of the thigh and calf, which are in excellent order, Their feeling was quite different. They were so filled with the beautiful vision of the man lying flat at the foot of the staircase that in the ecstasy the rest followed in a flash. In practice, the habit of generalizing and idealizing did not by any means mean worldly weakness. The time of big theories was the time of big result. Right? So efficiency is a symbol or a note, like a symptom of weakness, right? Of our society. What kind of weakness? You can talk about it like emotional and mental health side weakness, right? We don't really value being mentally healthy that much, but we are very economically strong, right? Definitely stronger than the past if we compare GDPs. And then the other thing is driving yourself harder or working for longer as if you were a machine in the Industrial Revolution, instead of asking whether the demands themselves might be unreasonable. That's just like the example of the monk, right? Chelsea, can you read this for us again? Yeah. Suppose that a great commotion. This is the last paragraph for heretics. Practicality. Municipal? Uh-huh.
Today, tomorrow, or the next day, there comes that conviction that belongs to this right now. And that all depends on what is philosophy of life. Only what we might have discussed under the guest of Crystal, we now must discuss in time.
Right. It's the same idea here, right? Instead of asking whether the demands themselves might be unreasonable. He just uses the example of the monk here, asking whether or not it's reasonable to take it off, right? To take down the lamp. But people don't want to think about it. And it becomes a lot more intuitive to project your thoughts about your life into an imagined future, leaving you anxiously wondering if things will unfold as you want them to, right? We think about, okay, if I do this, will I get that? Right? We think about, well, if I come here, is it going to improve my grades? Is it going to promise a better future for me? And we use that to justify how we do things, right? Soon your sense of self-worth gets completely bound up with how you're using time. It stops being merely the water in which you swim and turns into something you feel you need to dominate or control. If you're to avoid feeling guilty, panicked, or overwhelmed. The title of a book that arrived on my desk the other day sums things up nicely. Master your time, master your life. But the irony is, it's like a fish trying to control water, right? If we think about, Peggy, you're okay. Right? If you think about a fish trying to control water, it's a fool's errand. They would never do it. They would never be able to actually dominate or control the thing that they need to live in, right? But they could buy a lot of tips or tricks to help them, but they'll never get what they actually want, right? Okay. Phoebe, can you read the paragraph here? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The fundamental problem is that this attitude toward time setups a rich game in which it's impossible ever to feel as though you're doing well enough. Instead of simply living your life as the unfold in time, instead of just being time, you might say, it becomes difficult not to value each other moment primarily according to its usefulness for some future goal, or for some future oasis of relaxation you hope to reach once your tasks are finally out of the way. Superficially, this seems like a sensible way to live, especially in a hyper-competitive economic climate, in which it feels as though you must constantly make the most judicious use of your time if you want to stay afloat. It has reflected the manner in which most of us were raised to prioritize future benefits over current enjoyments. But ultimately, it backfires. It wrenches us out of the present, leading to a lifespan leaning into the future, worrying about whether things will work out, experiencing everything in terms of some later hope for benefit, so that peace of mind never quite arrives. And it makes it all but impossible to experience deep time, the sense of time as time, which depends on forgetting the abstract yardstick and plugging back into the vividness of reality instead.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Have you guys seen the movie Don't Look Up? Leonardo DiCaprio, the new one on Netflix. You guys know what I'm talking about? Don't Look Up. See if I can find a trailer of it. Oh, you guys, yeah, there we go. Okay. Can I play this? Classroom. Oh. Is it right now? Okay, yeah.
Not real, this is not real. This isn't happening. Kate, tell me this isn't really happening.
I hear there's something you don't like the looks of.
We discovered a very large comet.
Oh, good for you.
It's headed directly towards Earth.
This comet is what we call a planet killer.
At this exact moment, I say we sit tight and assess.
Sit tight and assess?
Sit tight.
And then assess. The sit tight part comes first, so you gotta digest it. That's the assessment period. This is the worst news in the history of humanity. You just blew us off.
What are we gonna do? We have to release the information.
So we just leak it.
Our guests today have made a pretty big discovery in space.
How big is this thing, Nolan? I can't destroy my ex-wife's house. Is that possible?
There's a 100% chance that we're all going to die.
Hey.
Well, the handsome astronomer can come back anytime, but the yelling lady, not so
Not so much.
We're gonna get the news out there, one way or another.
It's real and it's coming.
Jesus Christ, you could have just called me.
This comet contains $30 trillion worth of material.
What do trillions of dollars matter if we're all gonna die?
Oh, no, if we're rich, that would be terrible.
You guys discovered a comet? I have a tattoo of a shooting star on my back.
Oh, that's terrific. This could be a complete disaster.
This is already a disaster.
You heard that girl from live TV said we're all gonna die?
No.
You'll never take me alive.
It's late! Can you see it?
I can't! My head is in a bag!
I did have the FBI put that bag over your head. They don't do that. The CIA does, but I made them do it.
You know, I have a feeling.
It's a good feeling because that is what I did, and it was very funny and cool.
Anyway, the whole movie is about time, about us running out of time. Literally, a comet about to strike Earth, but everybody is just worried about, well, how to get rich, or like, wait, how do I use my time efficiently, rather than preventing this whole thing from destroying the planet. If you guys go watch that movie, you guys can check it out and tell me what you think. Let's go through and think more about time, because really time is what, well, it's the water for the fish, right? Time for us, it's time. Time is our kind of water. The better you are at using time, the better life can be, right? Okay. Okay, Confessions of a Productivity Geek. I'm just going to read through this very quickly because the good part's in the back. The rest of this book is an exploration of a saner way of relating to time and a toolbox of practical ideas for doing so, drawn from the work of philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual teachers who all rejected the struggle to dominate or master it. Or master it. I believe it sketches a kind of life that's vastly more peaceful and meaningful, while also, it turns out, being better for sustained productivity over the long haul. Don't get me wrong, I spent years trying and failing to achieve mastery over my time. In fact, the symptoms were especially glaring in the subspecies to which I belonged. I was a productivity geek. You know, how some people are passionate about bodybuilding or fashion or rock climbing or poetry. Productivity geeks are passionate about crossing items off their to-do list. So it's sort of the same, except infinitely sadder. My adventure with Inbox Zero were only the tip of the iceberg. I squandered countless hours and a fair amount of money, spent mainly on fancy notebooks and felt tip pens, in service to the belief that if I could only find the right time management system, build the right habits, and apply sufficient self-discipline, I might actually be able to win the struggle with time, once and for all. Again, right? The belief is what matters here. Like, if you believe that by going to university and studying business, you can make a lot of money, well, that's exactly what you're going to do. But that might not promise the kind of results that you want, right?
I was enabled in this delusion by writing a weekly newspaper column on productivity, which gave me an excuse to experiment with new techniques on the grounds that I was doing so for work purposes. I was like an alcoholic conveniently employed as a wine expert. On one occasion, I tried scheduling the whole of every day in 15-minute blocks. On another, I used a kitchen timer to work exclusively in periods of 25 minutes, interspersed with 5-minute breaks. This approach has an official name, the Pomodoro Technique, and a cult following online. I divided my list into A, B, and C priorities. Guess how many B and C priorities tasks I ever got around to completing. I try to align my daily actions with my goals and my goals with my core values. Using these techniques often made me feel as if I were on the verge of ushering in a golden age of calm, undistracted productivity and meaningful activity. But it never arrived. Instead, I just got more stressed and unhappy. Take note of this kind of feeling, right? I think everyone in this room can relate to something like this, of like feeling like if only I could just get this little bit more done, or if only I am, if only I can just be a bit more efficient, or if only I am better at this by a little bit more, I'm almost there, that kind of feeling, right? Just a bit more, but you're never quite there, right? It's the idea of like having that carrot dangling in front of the donkey. The donkey is always moving forward, but the carrot is also getting farther as you get closer to it, right? But what's our carrot, right? That's what we want to think about. And until you can realize and recognize the carrot that's dangling in front of you, you're always going to be chasing it, right? What's your carrot? That's a really interesting question to think of. So I remember sitting on a park bench near my home in Brooklyn one winter, a morning in 2014, feeling even more anxious than usual about the volume of undone tasks. I suddenly realizing that none of this was ever going to work. I would never succeed in marshaling enough efficiency, self-discipline, and effort to force my way through to the feeling that I was on the top of everything, that I was fulfilling all my obligations and had no need to worry about the future. Ironically, the realization that this had been a useless strategy for attaining peace of mind brought me some immediate peace of mind. After all, once you become convinced that something you've been attempting is impossible, it's a lot harder to keep on berating yourself for failing. What I had yet to understand at that point was why all of these methods were doomed to fail, which was that I was using them to try to obtain a feeling of control over my life that would always remain out of reach. Right? Again, what he's saying here is that beginning quote. It's what you believe, right? And the moment you recognize this uncurable thing is uncurable and you stop having that mistaken belief that you can make it better, you let go. The moment you let go, things are immediately better. It's also true not just in time management, not just in this particular case, but oftentimes in human relationships, right? Most of the time, conflicts are just both sides or one of the sides not letting go of what they insist. You might be right, and your friend might be wrong, and you are rightfully upset, but it's because you wouldn't let go of you being right that you're upset. Which then leads to attention and, arguments in relationships. Okay. Though I'd been largely unaware of it, my productivity obsession had been serving a hidden emotional agenda. For one thing, it helped me combat the sense of precariousness inherent to the modern world of work. If I could meet every editor's every demand while launching various side projects of my own, maybe one day I'd feel secure I'd finally feel secure in my career and my finances. But also held at bay certain scary questions about what I was doing with my life, and whether major changes might not be added. If I could get enough work done, my subconscious had apparently concluded, I wouldn't need to ask if it was all that healthy to be deriving so much of my sense of self-worth from work in the first place. And as long as I was always just on the cusp of mastering my time, I could avoid the thought that what life was really demanding from me might involve surrendering the craving for mastery and diving into the unknown instead. In my case, that turned out to mean committing to a long-term relationship and later making the decision with my wife to try to start a family. Two things I notably failed to get done with any number of systems for getting things done. It had been more comforting to imagine that I might eventually optimize myself into the kind of person who could confront such decisions without fear, feeling totally in charge of the process. I didn't want to accept that this was never going to happen, that fear was part of the deal, and that experiencing it wouldn't destroy me. This is a really great kind of personal anecdote to highlight the absurdity of how we often recognize time, right? Because a lot of times what's happening is we are so afraid of, there's so much fear involved in the process that we are so obsessed with removing the fear instead of actually just doing the thing, right? We want to make sure it's totally 100% controllable first before we actually do it. Because we think it's possible, again, the belief that it's possible to get rid of this fear. When in fact the fear is uncurable, right? It's inherent. So we get caught up in curing the uncurable, curing the uncurable, instead of just doing the doable, right? The other idea that's absurd, right, is that it had been more comforting to imagine that I might eventually optimize myself into the kind of person who could confront such decisions without fear. What's implicit is we tend to think we can make ourselves more efficient, optimize ourselves into something better. But that language is a language of what kind of thing when we describe we can optimize? What do we usually describe as things that we can optimize? Jason, what do you think? Things that optimize? Make efficient? Where do you usually hear people talking about optimization? Machines, right? Machines, systems, robots, engines, right? Machines are things that are optimizable. But what's the opposite of machines? What's the opposite of machines? Maxine, what do you think? What are the opposite of machines? Humans, exactly.
So if machines are things that we can optimize, but humans are the direct opposite. When we try to optimize humans, what does it mean about being human? For example, if we optimize a machine, we make better machines, right? That's true. But if we optimize humans, what do we get? Do we get better humans? What do you guys think? Ian, what do you think? Why?
Because you can't really like optimize humans. It's not like a mission that you can make.
Okay, yeah, you can optimize humans in some ways, but you don't get better humans. What do you get instead, though? Huh?
Like a smarter, like more intelligent human.
Smarter in what way, though? You say they're smarter, but you say they're not necessarily better, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, let's keep going. Like, okay, smarter in what way? What do you mean by smarter?
Like they can do more like things.
For example?
Like they can do things that they can't do before.
Okay, better at solving problems. Maybe faster at solving problems, right? Yes, that's what optimization means, right? But you say they're not necessarily better humans, not necessarily better humans. What's missing? Why is it that just because you can solve problems faster doesn't make you a better human? Because that's what you're implying here, right? Something is missing. That's not the problem for machines, but it is the problem for humans.
What do you mean by better?
This is a thought experiment, right? We say when we optimize machines, we produce better machines. When we optimize humans, do we produce better humans, right? Because that's what the author says. He used to believe that he could one day eventually optimize himself into the kind of person who could confront such decisions without fear. Right? So we're trying to play with this idea of optimizing human beings. And so what do I mean by better? Well, this is the crux of the issue, right? What does it mean to be better as a better human? Ian said that being a better and faster, being an optimized human means you are better and faster at solving problems. But that smarter doesn't mean you're better. Just because you're smarter doesn't mean you're a better human. So the question that I'm asking is, well, what's missing? Or what do you need to be a better human? What is a better human compared to a not so good human?
You guys notice how this is getting towards the crux of these questions, what is a better human or what is a not so good human, takes us to this. What does it mean to be human? Right? The core kind of philosophical question. What does it mean to be human? Clearly, it's not just being better and smarter at solving questions or problems. Because it's not enough, right? Something's still missing. What is it that's missing, though? What else does a human need other than just being optimized and better at solving problems? That's good, but it doesn't seem like it's enough. Something's still missing. Well, more generally, what does it mean to be better? He goes on to say, but don't worry. We won't be dwelling here on my personal hang-ups. The universal truth behind my specific issue is that most of us invest a lot of energy on one way or another in trying to avoid fully experiencing the reality in which we find ourselves. We don't want to feel the anxiety that might arise if we were to ask ourselves whether we're on the right path or what ideas about ourselves it could be to give up time. We don't want to risk getting hurt in relationships or failing professionally. We won't want to accept that we might never succeed in pleasing our parents or in changing the things we don't like about ourselves. And we certainly don't want to get sick and die. The details differ from person to person, but the kernel is the same. We recoil from the notion that this is it. That this is life. That this life, with all its flaws and inescapable vulnerabilities, its extreme brevity, and our limited influence over how it unfolds, is the only one we'll get a shot at. Instead, we mentally fight against the way things are, so that, in words of the psychotherapist Bruce Tift, we don't have to consciously participate in what it's like to feel claustrophobic, imprisoned, powerless, and constrained by reality. This struggle against the distressing constraints of reality is what some old-school psychoanalysts called neurosis, and it takes countless forms, from workaholism and commitment phobia to codependency and shyness, and chronic shyness. All of this because we don't want to face, well, the reality of things, that this is it, right? And we hoping that we can escape from it. What this is like a fish trying to escape water.
A fish in water, humans in time. But for us humans, we're always trying to get away from time, trying to get a bit more of time, trying to get a better use of time, right? There are things that we're doing as human beings essentially to get away from time. And what we're doing is like a fish trying to get away from water. It's absurd when we use this analogy, but immediately it's obvious, right? The consequences are pretty grim. You can't live without time, but if you insist on getting away from time, of using time, right? You naturally end up depressed, right? Having workaholism or neurosis, right? And chronic shyness. These are not accidents. It's because we tend to have a belief that we can do something more with the time than what's presently available. The misguided belief. Okay. Our troubled relationship with time arises largely from this same effort to avoid the painful constraints of reality. Most of our strategies for becoming more productive make things worse, because they're really just ways of furthering the avoidance. After all, it's painful to confront how limited your time is, because it means that tough choices are inevitable, and that you won't have time for all you once dreamed you might do. It's also painful to accept your limited control over the time you do get. Maybe you simply lack the stamina or talent or other resources to perform well in all these roles you feel you should. And so, rather than face our limitations, we engage in avoidance strategies in an effort to carry on feeling limitless. We push ourselves harder, chasing fantasies of the perfect work-life balance. Or we implement time management systems that promise to make time for everything, so that tough choices won't be required. Or we procrastinate, which is another means of maintaining the feeling of omnipotent control over life, because you needn't risk upsetting the experience of failing at an intimidating project, obviously, if you never even started. We fill our minds with busyness and distraction to numb ourselves emotionally. And we labor at our daily work more ardently and thoughtlessly than is necessary to sustain life, wrote Nietzsche, because to us it is even more necessary not to have leisure to stop and think. Haste is universal, because everyone is in flight from himself. This is a really beautiful quote, right? We work harder than we need to because it is even more necessary not to have time to think. Haste is universal because everyone is in flight from himself. We work because we're afraid. Of what? Right? Most people work because it's good distraction. It's this quote from Utopia for Realists on page 151. Work is the refuge of people who have nothing better to do.
Work is the refuge for people who have nothing better to do. People hide in work when they have nothing better or more meaningful in their life, right? Haste is universal because everyone is in flight from himself. We labor at our daily work more ardently and thoughtlessly than is necessary to sustain our life, because to us it is even more necessary not to have leisure to stop and think. Right? Because thinking is scary, because it requires you to confront a lot of the things that you're not used to or you're not sure of, right? Okay. Or we plan compulsively because the alternative is to confront how little control over the future we really have. Moreover, most of us seek a specifically individualistic kind of mastery over time. Our culture's ideal is that you alone should control your schedule, doing whatever you prefer, whenever you want. It's scary to confront the truth that almost everything worth doing, from marriage and parenting to business or politics, depends on cooperating with others, and therefore on exposing yourself to the emotional uncertainties of relationships. Denying reality never works, though. Right? It's like a fish denying water. It may provide some immediate relief because it allows you to go on thinking at some point in the future you might at last feel totally in control. But it can't ever bring the sense that you're doing enough, that you are enough, because it defines enough as a kind of limitless control that no human can attain. Right? If we continue the fish analogy, it's like a fish believing that there's no freedom until he escapes water, because he has to survive with water, right? And so true independence is when the fish can finally live without water. In the same way here, right? It may provide some immediate relief because it allows you to go on thinking that at some point in the future you might at last feel totally in control. But it can't ever bring in that sense that you're doing enough, that you are enough, because it defines enough as a kind of limitless control that no human can attain. Instead, the endless struggle leads to more anxiety and a less fulfilling life, right? For example, the more you believe you might succeed in fitting everything in, the more commitments you naturally take on, and the less you feel the need to ask whether each new commitment is truly worth a portion of your time. The need to ask, right? Asking is what the monk does. Right? In Heretics. And so your days inevitably fill with more activities you don't especially value. Just like needing to talk in the dark. The more you hurry, the more frustrating it is to encounter tasks or toddlers that won't be hurried. The more compulsively you plan for the future, the more anxious you feel about any remaining uncertainty, of which there will always be plenty. And the more individual sovereignty you achieve over your time, the lonelier you get. All of this illustrates what might be termed the paradox of limitation, which runs through everything that follows. The more you try to manage your time with the goal of achieving a feeling of total control and freedom from the inevitable constraints of being human, the more stressful, empty, and frustrating life gets. But the more you confront the facts of finitude instead, and work with them rather than against them, the more productive, meaningful, and joyful life becomes. I don't think the feeling of anxiety ever completely goes away. We're even limited, apparently, in our capacity to embrace our limitations. But I'm aware of no other time management technique that's half as effective as just facing the way things truly are. There's a really interesting point here, that the more you confront the facts of finitude instead and working with them rather than against them, the more productive, meaningful, and joyful life becomes. The less you try, the more easier it seems. right? I don't think that apparently anxiety ever goes away. Blah, blah, blah. Which runs through everything that follows from trying to, yeah. Be more human. Yep. Paradox of limitation. The more you try to control, the less you seem to be able to control. Right? The more you plan, the more things go wrong. Okay. Chelsea, can you read the next part for us? And I see blast of reality. Consciously. FOMO. Okay, thank you. Maxine, can you read the next part? Eigensight. Good, thank you. Imagine being able to like totally plan out your life 100% and your life going exactly the way you planned it. Like, would you want to live a life, that life? right? If everything 100% goes according to your plan, would it be a life worth living? Or would it be super boring because everything is already done? Kind of like the idea of utopia, right? Everything is perfect already. So it's interesting, right? That oftentimes we want to plan but not overplan. We want to do things but not overdo them. We want to see things in the right way, apply enough action in it just so we can enjoy the process, but also not be overly controlling, right? How do we find that balance between planning just enough and then taking a step back and letting time use you? I think it's everybody's life lesson, right? Everybody's just trying to figure this out. And there's no right answers or wrong answers, but really it's only when we start thinking about it carefully that we don't waste time trying to do things that are ultimately impossible to cure. I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting our troubles with time are somehow all in the mind, or that a simple change of outlook will cause them all to vanish. Time pressure comes largely from force outside of ourselves, from a cutthroat economy, from the loss of the social safety nets and family networks that used to help ease the burdens of work and childcare, and from the sexist expectations that women must excel in their careers while assuming most of the responsibilities at home, or, from school, right? Obviously another source of time pressure, and from your parents. None of that will be solved by self-help alone, as the journalist Anne Helen Peterson writes in a widely shared essay on a millennial burnout. You can't fix such problems with vacations, or an adult coloring book, or anxiety baking, or the Pomodoro technique, or overnight fucking oats. But my point here is that however privileged or unfortunate your specific situation, fully facing the reality of it can only help. So long as you continue to respond to impossible demands on your time by trying to persuade yourself that you might one day find some way to do the impossible, you're implicitly collaborating with those demands. Whereas once you deeply grasp that they are impossible, you'll be newly empowered to resist them and to focus instead on building the most meaningful life you can in whatever situation you're in. Meaningful life. Maybe this is what's missing with what it means to be a better human, is one that can live a more meaningful life. Right? The better you are at being a human is essentially better at creating meaning for yourself, creating meaning for others, creating meaningful experiences, experiencing meaningful moments. Maybe that's what it means to be a better human, right? If that's the case, can we optimize for meaning as human beings? How do you do that? Right? So long as you can continue to respond to impossible demands on your time by trying to persuade yourself that you might one day find some way to do the impossible, you're implicitly collaborating with those demands. Whereas once you deeply grasp that they are impossible, like the ideas of utopia, right? Utopia is the belief, right, of perfect society or a non-existent place. This idea that you can fit everything in your time and do everything you want is a utopian idea. You'll be newly empowered to resist them the moment you recognize they are impossible, right? Again, that beginning quote is the belief that determines how you treat things. And suffering comes from wrong belief. Or misguided beliefs. Right? So the moment you deeply grasp that they are impossible, you'll be newly empowered to resist them and to focus instead on building the most meaningful life you can in whatever situation you're in. This is like that very first quote from Utopia for Realists. Oscar Wilde again, right? Kaden, can you read this for us?
A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. And when humanity lands there, it looks out, and seeing a better country, sets sail. Progress is the realization of utopia.
It's slightly different in the way he looks at it, but it's the same idea, right? That we need to recognize that it's impossible. We recognize that it's not a place where we want to stay, but we keep improving. We keep going towards a better future, right? He says, a map of the world that does not include utopia, or that does not include a belief of something better, is not even worth glancing at. It's not even worth trying or thinking about, because it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. And when humanity lands there, it looks out, and seeing a better country sets sail. Progress is the realization of utopias. In other words, right, if we keep struggling, if we keep trying to do something, focus instead on building the most meaningful life, right, that's where real meaning is, right? It's in the landing and leaving. It's in that process, in the moment of doing, that creates the meaning and meaningful life. And Kenna, can you finish the rest of the paragraph for us? This notion.
This notion that fulfillment might lie in embracing rather than denying are temporal limitations. One has surprised the philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome. They understood limitlessness to be the sole preserve of the gods. The noblest of human goals wasn't to become godlike, but to be wholeheartedly human instead. In any case, this is just how reality is, and it can be surprisingly energizing to confront it. Back in the 1950s, a splendidly cranky British author named Charles Garfield Loughnane wrote a short book, Teach Yourself to Live, in which he recommended the limit embracing life, and he responded softly to the suggestion that his advice is depressing. Depressing? Not a bit of it. No more depressing than a cold shower is depressing. You are no longer befogged and bewildered by a false misleading illusion about your life, like most people. This is an excellent spirit in which to confront the challenge of using time well. None of us can single-handedly overthrow a society dedicated to limitless productivity, distraction, and speed. But right here, right now, you can stop buying into the delusion that any of that is ever going to bring satisfaction. You can face the facts. You can turn on the shower. Brace yourself for some
Invigorating
icy water
and step in. Good. Thank you. The noblest of human goals wasn't to become godlike, but to be wholeheartedly human instead. Right? This is the question of what it means to be human. And like that last part, this is an excellent spirit in which to confront the challenge of using time well. None of us can single-handedly overthrow a society dedicated to limitless productivity, distraction, and speed. But right here, right now, you can stop buying into the illusion that any of that is ever going to bring satisfaction. You can face the facts. You can turn on the shower, brace yourself for some invigorating icy water, and step in. Right? It's the same idea here. What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured. Right? The moment you realize it cannot be cured, you can face it, and that's when true meaning, true progress can be made, whether for yourself or for society. Right? Okay. Any questions, comments, thoughts on chapter 1 of this book? Okay, I want to get to the pitfalls of convenience. Okay, let's go through the efficiency trap very quickly. Again, we see the key word, right? The efficiency trap. Whenever you see words that you recognize from previous readings, you can immediately bring everything you've learned from those readings into it, right? What are the views of efficiency? Efficiency is good in these senses, efficiency is not good in these senses, right? That's going to help with automatically understanding what he's going to talk about, right? Efficiency trap, well, just from these three words, you can probably see that it's going to be a negative / argument against efficiency, right? Just from the fact that you can implicitly know what trap means, right? That's not a good thing. You get caught in it. So if it's a trap, how is it a trap? We already know why it's bad from G.K. Chesterton. Because it's a sign of weakness, right? But he's going to probably give us a different perspective. But yeah, I'm not going to get into here because we're running out of time. What is Sisyphus? Anybody know? The myth of Sisyphus? Sisyphus is a guy in Greek mythology that is condemned by the gods to like push a rock up the mountain, and then that the rock, once it gets to the top, will fall down, and he has to do it like forever. That's the myth of Sisyphus. That's it. So part of the really useful things about, did I spell it wrong? Yeah. Sisyphus. Really useful things about just knowing a little bit of Greek mythology is that you can use references and people will immediately understand what you're trying to talk about. Here he's using Sisyphus's inbox, like an email, right? And so instead of pushing a rock, what would Sisyphus be doing? Instead of pushing a rock up the hill and then having it roll down and doing it again, Sisyphus' inbox would be us deleting the emails that are in our inbox only to get more emails that come in and delete them, only to like this constant work of clearing the inbox, right? Here, right here. Phoebe, can you read this part for us? This whole painful irony? It's on the bottom right, I think. Next page.
This whole painful irony is especially striking in a case of email, that ingenious 20th century invention whereby a random person on the planet can pester you at any time they like and at almost no cost to themselves. By means of digital windows that sit inches from your nose, or in your pockets, throughout your working day, and often on weekends too. The input side of this arrangement, the numbers of emails that you could, in principle, receive is essentially infinite. But the output side, the numbers of messages you will have to time to read properly, reply to, or just make a considered decision to delete, is strictly
finite. Strictly finite.
So getting better at processing your email is like getting faster and faster at quality of an infinitely tall ladder. You will feel more rush, but no matter how quickly you go, you never reach the top. In ancient Greek myth, the gods pushing King Sisyphus for his
arrogance
by sentencing him to push an enormous boulder up a hill, only to see it roll back down again. In action, he is condemned to repeat for all eternity. In the contemporary version, Sisyphus would empty his inbox, lean back, and take a deep breath before hailing familiar pain. You have to resist it.
It gets worse though, because here the goalpost shifting effect kicks in. Every time you reply to an email, there's a good chance of provoking a reply to the email, which itself may require another reply, and so on until the heat death of the universe. At the same time, you'll become known as someone who responds promptly to email. So more people will consider it worth their while to message you to begin with. By contrast, negligent emailers frequently find that forgetting to reply ends up saving them time. People find alternative solutions to the problems they were nagging you to solve, or the looming crisis they were emailing you about never materializes. So it's not simply that you never get it through your email, it's that the process of getting through your email actually generates more mail. The general principle in operation is one you might call the efficiency trap. Rendering yourself more efficient, either by implementing various productivity techniques or by driving yourself harder, won't generally result in the feeling of having enough time. Because, all else being equal, the demands will increase to offset any benefits. Far from getting things done, you'll be creating new things to do. So being good at what you want to be good at is very important. You don't want to accidentally optimize for the thing you don't want to optimize. If you optimize for problem solving and optimize for doing homework, you're going to be really good at doing homework. And because you're good at doing homework, you get extra homework. Right? You got to do more things because your mom's like, wow, so talented, I'm going to send you to more of these since you're so good at finishing them. There's a really interesting parallel or similar idea that I really liked when I was in high school. It's called the dishwasher theory. It's the idea like if your mom tells you to do the dishes and you put all the dishes in the dishwasher and you get really good at it, so you do it really quickly. And because you're really good at it, now your mom's like, well, because you're so much faster than I am, you can do it for me because you're more efficient, right? And so the way to get around the dishwasher theory is to do a terrible job at putting all the plates in there, stacking it up all the wrong ways, doing the chores all the wrong ways, creating a mess. And your mom's like, oh my gosh, stop, I'll do it. And then you can be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to do it. And then you walk away from the problems. Really useful tip, by the way, when you're in college living with roommates and they want you to clean up and you do a terrible job and they're like, okay, I'll do it. Then you never have to do dishwashing again, in theory. So you want to think about what are the things you're optimizing for, right? If you're good at doing certain things that you don't like doing, don't do it, right? And if you want things to happen to you more, then optimize towards that, right? If you would like to teach critical reading one day, you would want to read more books, right? Just common sense. For most of us, most of the time, it isn't feasible to avoid the efficiency trap altogether. After all, few of us are in the position not to attempt to get through our email, even if the consequences is that we receive more email. The same applies to life's other responsibilities too. We're often obliged to find ways to cram more into the same amount of time, even if we end up feeling busier as a result. So I don't mean to imply that once you grasp what's going on here, you'll magically never feel busy again. But the choice you can make is to stop believing you'll ever solve the challenge of busyness by cramming more in, because that just makes matters worse. And once you stop investing in the idea that you might one day achieve peace of mind that way, it becomes easier to find peace of mind in the present, in the midst of overwhelming demands, because you're no longer making your peace of mind dependent on dealing with all the demands. It suddenly makes a lot of sense if you just look at it this way and read it this way, like, right, if you stop depending on if you stop depending your peace on getting everything done and just enjoying the now, then what's stopping you? Right? It's like this quote I saw the other day. The light at the end of the tunnel Have you guys heard of that expression, the light at the end of the tunnel? Is not the illusion. The tunnel is. The real illusion in that whole situation is not the light, it's the tunnel. Light is just everywhere. You just happen to see it like this. So you assume that the light is at the end of the tunnel and you have to get there. When the illusion in reality is the tunnel, that tunnel vision. Once you stop believing that it might somehow be possible to avoid hard choices about time, it gets easier to make the better ones. You begin to grasp that when there's too much to do, and there always will be, the only route to psychological freedom is to let go of the limit-denying fantasy of getting it all done, and instead to focus on doing a few things that counts, right? Change of belief. Change your belief, change your life. Have you guys seen like those videos on how to fold clothes really quickly? Like 3 seconds, you can fold a single shirt or something like that. Like the thing where I think I still remember. It's like you put the shirt out like this, and then you're like done, something like that. I think. I remember when I was told to fold my own clothes, I went on YouTube and I looked it up, and I was like, "Wait, Dad! I found a way to fold your clothes in 3 seconds." I thought he was gonna do it, and he's like, "No, since you're so good at it, why don't you do all of it?" And I was like, I realized that it didn't make sense to optimize the clothes folding because it just gave me more work. Right. Okay, let's fast forward to the pitfalls of convenience. Yeah, the pitfalls of convenience. Ian, can you read this part for us? The first paragraph, pitfalls of convenience. Insidious. Subtly worse, yep. Right, so over optimizing. Jason, can you read the next part?
It works like this. The startup jargon. The way to make a fortune in Silicon Valley is to identify a pain point. One of the small annoyances resulting from poor jargon. The fiction of daily life. And then she offers a way to circumvent it. Thus Uber eliminates the pain of having to track down a number of your local taxi companies and call. We're trying to close a gap in the street. Digital wallet apps like Apple Pay remove the pain of having to reach into your bag for your physical wallet or cash. The food delivery service Seamless has even run advertisements, cheap ones, but still, boasting that it lets you to avoid the agony of talking to a flesh and blood restaurant worker. Instead, you need only commune with the screen. It's true that everything runs more smoothly this way. But smoothness, it turns out, it's a
Dubious.
virtue. Since it's often the unsmooth textures of life that make it livable. Helping you nurture the relationships that are crucial for mental and physical health, and for the
Resilience?
resilience of our community.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's true that everything runs more smoothly this way, but smoothness, it turns out, is a dubious virtue, since it's often the unsmooth textures of life that makes it livable, right? It's actually texture that makes life enjoyable. It's the nuances, the things that get in the way of you being super efficient, right? Because, for example, you have to sit down and eat. You have to slow down to enjoy food. And it seems like the price of the food increases in proportion to the amount of time it takes to finish the meal. Right? The more expensive it is a meal, it seems like it takes longer to eat. It's certainly less efficient. Right? And it's the same thing, right? When you go look at a painting, a real painting has texture. It's not just color. But if you look at it online or from your screen, you can't see that kind of brushstroke or the thickness of the paint. And that creates a different kind of experience, right? And when it's missing texture, life becomes a lot more dull. It's too smooth, right? Overly optimized. That is not conducive to meaningful living. Okay, Chelsea, can you read the next paragraph? Convenience.
Convenience, in other words, makes things simple. Without regard to wireless, easiness is truly what's most vulnerable in any given context. Take those services on which I rely too much on my customers that let you design and remotely mail a burger cart, so you never see or touch the physical item yourself. Better than nothing, perhaps. The sender and recipient both know that it's more substitute for purchasing a card in a shop, writing on Gaigan and then walking to a mailbox again. Because contrary to the cliche, it isn't really about that counts, but the effort, just to say, and convenience. And you render the process more convenient. You drain the self-esteem. The virtue capitalist and rather compliant Alex Gorhania.
Okay, that's good. It's the thought that counts. The effort, which is to say the inconvenience. When you render the process more convenient, you drain it of its meaning. So what he's saying is that there is a relationship between convenience inconvenience and meaning. Right? Like, on your birthdays, would you rather get a... Actually, no. What makes you feel good? Is it to get a really... Is it to get cash or get like a handwritten card from your friend that is very long, and has a lot of thought in it? Usually we would... The cash might feel good in the moment, but over time it's the card that has more meaning, right? Because it took time and effort to write and think about and come through. And it makes you feel better, and you can carry that with you for a longer period of time. But certainly it's a lot more convenient or easier to just buy you a gift or give you cash, or I'll give you a gift card. But it doesn't have a lot of meaning. And so one of the things you can think about in life, like how do you make life better or enjoyable, is, well, can we have more meaning, right? So what does it mean to be a better human? Maybe it is about enjoying the inconveniences of being human, right? The venture capitalist Reddit co-founder Alex Ohanian has observed that we often don't even realize something is broken until someone else shows us a better way. But the other reason we might not realize some everyday process is broken is that it isn't broken to begin with, and that the inconvenience involved, which might look like brokenness from the outside, in fact, it embodies something essentially human, right? The inconvenience is what makes us human. Humans are terrible machines because why? We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to rest. We are extremely inconvenient for companies making profit, right? But frequently, the effect of convenience isn't just that a given activity starts to feel less valuable, but that we stop engaging in certain valuable activities altogether in favor of some more convenient ones. Because you can stay home, order food on Seamless, and watch sitcoms on Netflix, you find yourself doing so, though you might be well aware that you'd have a better time had you kept your appointment to meet friends in the city or tried to make an interesting new recipe. I prefer to brew my coffee, the law professor Tim Wu writes in an essay on the pitfalls of convenience culture, but Starbucks Instant is so convenient I hardly ever do what I prefer. So there are times, right, when things are so convenient that you don't even do what you would rather do because it's so much easier, right? Meanwhile, those aspects of life that resist being made to run more smoothly start to seem repellent. When you can skip the line and buy concert tickets on your phone, Wu points out, waiting in line to vote in an election is irritating. As convenience colonizes everyday life, activities gradually sort themselves into two types. The kind that are now far more convenient, but that feel empty or out of sync with our true preferences, and the kind that now seem intensely annoying because of how inconvenient they remain. Okay. Howard, can you read the next part? Mm-hmm.
All this as an individual or as a family takes fortitude. Because the smoother life gets, the more perverse you'll seem if you insist on maintaining the rough edges by choosing the inconvenient way of doing things. Get rid of your smartphone, quit using Google, or choose snail mail over WhatsApp. And people are increasingly likely to question your sanity.
Right, good. It's literally like, where did my book go? Is it here? No. Oh, it's literally like this. Like, I keep my schedule on a physical planner. And people might think this is crazy, but it's certainly less efficient than Google, like Calendar, but definitely get to be more mindful and intentional in how you plan your time,
right? Because people can't just add you on their calendar and it appears on your time and your time gets taken away, right? But the idea is you want to intentionally create some friction in your life. Well, or you can intentionally create friction. Right? The right kind of inconvenience. For example, why do I prefer reading on books rather than ebooks? Because you can write on them directly. Well, ebooks you can take notes, but it's not the same as writing with your hands, right? When you create intentional, like the right kind of inconvenience, it makes life a lot more satisfying, right? In the same way that a dam, right? A dam that creates electricity is creating friction in a certain direction, right? It's causing resistance. That's what generates the power. You're just putting the dam in the right place. So for your own lives, you can do that too by putting dams up in certain places in your life. So you can actually generate more power from the friction you're intentionally creating. Okay, that's the paragraph. Let's read this part for Sylvia Keysmat. Could you finish this paragraph for us, Howard?
Still, it can be done. The Bible scholar and agriculturalist Sylvia Keysmat abandoned a full-time university position in Toronto because she was following a hunch that overwhelmed life, and the efficiencies and conveniences it seemed to necessitate were somehow undermining its meaning. She moved with her husband and children to a farm in the vast swath of the Canadian interior known as the Land Between, where each winter day begins by lighting the fire that will warm the farmhouse and provide heat for cooking.
Peggy, can you read this part for us? Every morning.
Every morning I carefully scrub out the ash of yesterday. As I leave the kindling and listen to the crackling of the roaring flame, I wait. The house is cool and all I have to do now for the next few minutes is be attentive and patient. The fire needs to be fed and nurtured into the strength of heat for cooking. If I walk away and leave it, it will die. If I forget to pay attention, it will die. Of course, being fired if I built it too big and forget to pay attention, I could die. Why take the chance? Someone once asked me how long it takes before I have my first hot cup of tea in the morning. Well, let's see. In the winter I light the fire, sweep the floor, and take the kids for chores, clean rooms, water for the cows, get them some hay, give the chickens some grain and their water, feed the ducks. Sometimes I help the kids with the horses and barn cats and then come back in. Then I put the kettle on. Maybe I get something to drink within an hour of waking. If things go well, an hour.
Yeah. So notice how she just does everything without the need of a watch, without the need of time, right? She's just task oriented. She's just able to do things because, well, that's what things needed to be done. She didn't need to know what time it was, whether it was 8:30 or 8:45. She just woke up when it was the right time and did things because the time was right. But we've lost this idea of the right time to do things, because we now follow a mechanical time, right? This is the should versus need. The internal versus external. Or external versus internal. And ultimately, it's about going with the flow. Right? Doing what's best for you. For yourself. Okay. Maxine, can you read the next paragraph for us?
Although I think perhaps it might be. Her days do seem busy and exactly that agreeable, not overwhelmed, which is very sense of those words. And obviously not everyone has the option of pursuing precisely her sort of but a real point is that her decision to make such a radical change arose from the recognition that she never managed to build a more meaningful life, which for her meant cultivating a more mindful relationship with her family's physical surroundings, by saving time and thereby squeezing more into her existence. To make time for what mattered, she needed to build peace.
This is great, thank you. This is advice for all of us, right? That you will never cultivate or lead to a more meaningful life by saving time and thereby squeezing more into your existence. To make time for what matters for yourself, you also need to give things up, right? Convenience culture seduces us into imagining that we might find room for everything important by eliminating only life's tedious tasks, but it's a lie. You have to choose a few things, sacrifice everything else, and deal with the inevitable sense of loss that results. Kismet chose building fires and growing food with her children. How else are we to get to know this place where we have been set apart from tending to it, she writes. Outside of planting the food we eat, how are we going to learn the living character of soil, the various needs of peppers, lettuce, and kale? You might make a very different choice, of course, but the undodgeable reality of a finite human life is that you are going to have to choose. Okay, we're out of time. But next time's reading is going to be finishing The Importance of Living, 156. This is This Earth, the Only Heaven, till the end. So 156 to 165, okay? Theory of American Biases.